Title: The Malevolent Doppelganger. I never expected something so terrifying and crazy would happen to me. It's currently 1:49 a.m. Just under an hour ago, I couldn't sleep and decided to go out for a smoke. I rolled my spliff, went to the back door, and unlocked it. As I opened the door and stepped out, I did realize something was slightly off when I couldn't hear anything outside. The blood rushing in my ears suddenly deafening. I brushed it off and sat down. It was almost pitch black outside, but my eyes would adjust. As I lit up, I began to hear something around the corner, directly opposite side of the house from where I was. It was like this movement. It sounded kind of clumsy. It was uneven and would stop and start. I was put on edge by it but stayed out there, listening to it, and eventually got closer. I could hear it shifting surfaces and making a different sound, going from grass and leaves to the tiles around my house, meaning whatever it was much, much closer than I had realized. My heart dropped, deciding I'd had enough of this. I put out my spliff and went to go inside. Looking in the direction of the back door, I froze. Peeking around the corner was a face and hands just staring at me. It looked eerily familiar, but the darkness obscured the face enough to where I couldn't tell whose face it was. I dared not move a muscle, unintentionally beginning a starting contest from hell. I began to think of an escape route. I could run away from the back door, hop the fence, and run to my front door instead. The only problem being that the back door was still unlocked from when I left. I took my chances, and in a split second, turned and booked it for the fence. Hearing footsteps almost immediately heading towards me at a terrifying, inhuman pace, I screamed as I ran. By some miracle, the footsteps didn't advance enough to catch me, and I made it to my front door, only to realize too late that I needed my keys to get in. I spun around, expecting the worst, only to find not much better, though whatever it was staring at me again. From around the corner, they peeked their head and hands out. I couldn't tell if they were someone I could take in a fight or not because they were obscured by my house and the darkness of the night. But the eyes it stared at me with. They bore into me. They were utterly terrifying, inhuman, predatory eyes. I stared back at whatever it was, not daring to break eye contact, and tried to remember where my keys were. They were either at the back of the house where I was sitting, or they were inside, and in which case, I would have to go in through the back door anyway. Both outcomes meant I was slightly fucked. I stared at this horrible thing. The tension hung thick in the air, and the total silence didn't help. I prayed to whatever deity that I would make it back safely, starting to slightly lose hope, but desperately not wanting to admit it. I frantically thought for any kind of solution. I slowly moved my arms down to my pockets for any salvation when I felt my keys. They were on my belt loop the whole time. I moved as slowly as I possibly could as to not make any noise and set it off, still silently praying for this to all be a nightmare. With my back still turned to the door, I slowly felt for the keyhole. I took my keys, raised them to the door, and, psyching myself up, turned the key, swung the door open, removed the key, and slammed the door shut behind me. I fell to the floor the second I got in. I didn't realize I was sweating until I was inside and drenched in it. I slowly gathered myself to get up. I planned to go straight to bed, exhausted from the situation and the day beforehand. But it wasn't over. A tapping sounded from the window right next to the door. My heart sunk once again. I didn't want to look, and I couldn't tell you why, but I did look. Inside was just as dark, but I could see from the slightly brighter sky the silhouette of that thing standing right outside the window. I felt its gaze burning into me with pure, seething anger. Within a matter of seconds, though, it backed away from the window and walked off, its footsteps becoming quieter. I was relieved, again, until I realized it walked off in the direction of the back door. My heart dropped once more. I had to get there first. I scrambled to my feet and bolted through rooms towards the back door, silently praying again. As I ran, as I got closer to the door, I heard its terrifyingly fast footsteps on the tiles outside. I dove towards the door and turned the key that was, thankfully, already there. As soon as I twisted the key enough for it to just about be locked, the footsteps sounded from behind the door, and the handle started turning wildly. I barely made it in time. I was relieved once more, almost collapsing on the floor right then and there. I decided to check the rest of the doors, and windows through the house. I returned to the back door once I was satisfied to double-check everything. And I did double-check it. Everything was in order, so I went to leave for bed again. Yet I was stopped again, this time by a voice. Hey, it spoke. I froze. The voice was weird. I can't describe it well. It was a familiar voice, like a friend or something, but innately wrong. The pitch was inconsistent. It sounded warped and unnatural. You, open the door. I jumped at the raised voice it used for the last word. It sounded pieced together, like words from a song that might make sense next to each other, but when taken from different parts of the song, it sounds weird. I was completely frozen in place by the voice, unsure of my next move. What I really wasn't expecting, though, was for my cat's meow to come from the cat flap, all distorted and wrong again. It made me want to cry hearing that. I knew my cat was upstairs. He was sleeping deeply on my bed when I left him. I knelt down, and without looking at the plastic window, tried to lock it. I was completely caught off guard when a hand shot through the cat flap and tried to grab me. Thank God it missed me. I jumped back and stared at the dark shape of a disgustingly long arm feeling around for me. It moved in a truly unnatural way, like a giant serpent frantically looking for food. It made me feel sick watching it. Another distorted meow came from the door and failed to lure me to it. When it didn't find me, it felt its way up the door towards the handle and the key that was still in the lock. Without hesitation, I leaped towards it, snatched the key out of the door, and fell back out of its reach again. I seemed to anger it by doing that. You, it shouted at me. This is going to hurt. Its words unnerved me. It was being patient earlier. I wondered if it could have killed me outside. The arm finally slithered back outside, its face replacing it. I wasn't sure which was worse. I'm gonna come in. The last phrase sounded like someone calling from across the room after someone knocks on the door. It was then that I realized why the voice was so familiar. It was my voice. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to be sick. I ran to the bathroom but stopped in the doorway. The urge to throw up melted away as I looked at the canister of hairspray. I took it with me back to that thing. Its head was pushing the cat flap open when I got there. It was still too dark to see in detail, but I saw my target. I pulled out my lighter and lit it in front of the canister. The slight glow from the flame lit up the room just enough for me to see. I wouldn't have looked at its face given the choice, but I was already looking at it when I sparked the lighter. I was looking at my own face. It looked back at me. My heart dropped yet again. Then it smiled at me, a smile too wide for a human. Its face was wrong in so many ways, yet it was still my own face. I didn't understand what made it so unnatural, but it scared me. After finally snapping out of it, I jammed down on the hairspray. A giant, roaring fireball lit up the room in orange and landed straight in its face. It screeched in pain in my voice, but didn't back away. I felt the hatred in its glare. I sprayed it again, and it screeched again. This time, though, it twisted and contorted its body, slowly fitting through the tiny cat flap. Panic immediately set in. I sprayed it for a little too long and burnt my fingers pretty bad, dropping both my lighter and the hairspray. Its face was still on fire for a few seconds after, yet it was unrelenting. It squeezed and pushed its arms through. After it had one arm, it used it to push itself through. It was a horrifying sight watching it unnaturally fold and crumple parts of its own body to get to me. My fight or flight sense finally took hold of me and sent me sprinting away, shutting all the doors behind me. As I huddled in the cramped space of my wardrobe, fear coursing through my veins, I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to find a way to escape this malevolent doppelganger that was tormenting me, using my own voice and appearance against me. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I peeked out of the wardrobe, trying to assess the situation. The house was eerily quiet now. The trashing sounds had ceased, but that only heightened my unease. I couldn't be sure where it was or what it was planning next. Then I heard it again, my voice, echoing through the house, taunting me with cruel words meant to instill fear. It was calling my name, drawing me out, but I refused to fall for its tricks. I had to be smarter, more cunning. Gathering my courage, I quietly made my way through the house, avoiding the windows and staying in the shadows. I had to find a way to confront this creature and put an end to its reign of terror. My mind raced with thoughts of what it could be: a malevolent spirit, a vengeful doppelganger, or something even more sinister. As I cautiously approached the living room, I spotted my lighter and the hairspray lying on the floor where I dropped them earlier. An idea began to form in my mind, a desperate attempt to fight back. If fire was the only thing that seemed to harm it, then I needed to be prepared. Taking a deep breath, I retrieved the lighter and sprayed some hairspray into the cap. I had to be strategic and resourceful. My heart pounded loudly in my ears as I made my way towards the back door where it all began. The door still showed signs of the struggle, claw marks etched into the wood. I had to face my doppelganger head on. I couldn't let fear paralyze me any longer. This thing wanted to terrify me, to break me down, and I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. With my makeshift flamethrower in hand, I slowly turned the key in the lock, prepared to face whatever lay beyond the door. As the door swung open, I was met with darkness and an unsettling silence. My pulse quickened, but I pushed forward, stepping out into the cold night. It was eerily quiet again, the only sound being my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. Standing a few feet away, my doppelganger stared back at me with those twisted, predatory eyes. It wore my face like a grotesque mask, an abomination of my very being. My breath caught in my throat, but I refused to back down. I raised the makeshift flamethrower, flicked the lighter, and unleashed a torrent of fire towards the creature. It screeched in agony, the sound echoing through the night, but it didn't retreat. It kept coming, its body contorting and bending in unnatural ways. I continued to spray the flames, the orange glow casting haunting shadows on the surrounding walls. For a moment, it seemed as if I might have the upper hand, but my strength was waning. The creature lunged at me, knocking the makeshift flamethrower from my grasp. It grabbed hold of me with its elongated arms, its grip tightening around my throat. I struggled, gasping for breath, but it was overpowering me. It whispered terrible things in my voice, taunting me even in its pain. In my desperation, I reached for the discarded lighter on the ground. My fingers fumbled with it, but finally, I managed to ignite it once more. Summoning every last ounce of strength, I thrust the flame towards the creature, making contact with its grotesque face. The creature let out a guttural scream, its grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I stumbled backward, catching my breath as I watched the flames consume the creature. It writhed and thrashed in agony until it finally collapsed into a charred heap. The terror that had plagued me for what felt like an eternity was finally gone. The night air filled with the smell of burnt flesh and lingering fear. I sank to my knees, trembling, but a sense of relief washed over me. It was finally over. But as I gazed at the remains of the creature, a haunting thought crossed my mind. What if there were more like it? I couldn't be certain if this was an isolated incident or the beginning of something far more sinister. As the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, I knew that I couldn't stay in this house any longer. I had to leave, to find answers, and to ensure that I was truly free from whatever malevolent force had plagued me. So, with a heavy heart and a mind filled with questions, I gathered my belongings and left the house behind. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of this night would stay with me forever. But I knew one thing for sure, I would never be the same again. And so, my story continues, a tale of horror and survival that will haunt me for the rest of my days. As I move forward, I can't help but wonder if I truly escaped or if something far more sinister still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Only time will tell, but one thing remains clear. I'll never forget the night when I faced my malevolent doppelganger and lived to tell the tale.